Welcome to Daughters for Earth panel, Women and the Climate Change Movement. I have the absolute pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. Well, first, my name is Zainab Salvi. I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Daughters for Earth. Pleasure to introduce you, starting with my left, Helena Walinga. Helena is one of the co-founders. Yes, please, energy, we need energy. Helena is one of the co-founders of the global coalition Polluters Out. Currently, she works with the Women Earth and Climate Action Network. She comes from 20 years of environmental and human rights advocacy. So welcome to Helena. Thank you. To her left, we have Kahia Pushko.
Pusheko.
Oh, I'm so sorry. A native Hawaiian, and is a co-director of Women's Earth Alliance and a passionate advocate for Indigenous people's rights, intersectional environmentalism, and climate justice. Welcome to Kahea. Yeah! Yes, exactly. And then we have my friend and partner in crime, Justin Winters, who is the co-founder and executive director of One Earth. And which is the engine behind Daughters for Earth. She comes from over a decade of experience in the climate change and environmental spaces, much more than decade, but sorry, Justin, And of course, last but not least, our own Nina Simons, who is a co-founder and chief relationship officer of Bioneers. She's also the author and best-selling author. I meant to bring your book with me. I'm so sorry. I'm so excited about her book. I think it's a must-read for all of us. Her latest book called Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, a woman's lessons for leadership. So welcome to Nina. So here's the goal for this thing. We want to go down and dirty to the issue, right? It's a dialogue between all of us. It's a brainstorming also, because we don't have all the issues figured out. Obviously, otherwise we would have been in a much better place for Earth and for us. And then we'll just start it going, and then after that, I'm going to turn to you and ask for your questions and engagement in the conversation together. This is a sisterhood panel and discussion, and brothers are included, absolutely. I'm trying to see, I don't have good eyesight, but so allow me to start with Helena. So please keep your questions in mind, because towards the end, I'm going to turn it back to you for your own contributions. Helena, let me start. You gave a very, very, very touching sharing yesterday with your sister. It definitely stayed with me. And it's, as I took away from it, a struggle of definitely more than 20 years, but you capped it in 20 years from political struggle to climate struggle in a serious crisis that faced your community in Ecuador. Can you recap it for those who may have missed it? But also more than that, can you talk about the role of women in your community in dealing with these challenges, both not only being impacted by it, but also as leaders in creating some of the solutions out of it?
As you say, my community has, for over 20 years, been struggling with different, have had different fights. The first one that happened 20 years ago against the oil companies, and that turned into a legal battle that took over 10 years also to see victory. And of course, in every community, women are fundamental. Even though it's in the organizing or in the political spaces, or in our communities, in our homes. And I think female leadership was obviously extremely important in the victory that my community saw, but not only because of the political leadership that a lot of women took, but also because of the relationship that women have with, in our case, the rainforest. And I guess that's also why most of the world's biodiversity and untouched forests is not only just indigenous custodianship, but under indigenous women's custodianship. And that is really, really important to highlight, because that is also the reason why women have been at the front line and at the forefront of defending our lands and territories, because of this, closeness and relationship to Earth.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I have a million questions to follow up on that, but I want to get everyone's contribution, and then we'll go into a dialogue about that. Kahia, I'm very curious to learn about more, if you can share with us about the work of Women Earth's Alliance. And, in particular, I would love to get your perspective on generally women in leadership. I recently listened to a speech from a colleague of mine at Vital Voices, and she was talking that a lot of women don't consider themselves as leaders because they do not think that they have the qualifications of leaderships, right? But then you have to look at it from a different perspective in order to say, oh, I am a leader. Empathy is a point of leadership. Compassion is a point of leadership. So I'm curious about both the work that you do with the Women's Earth Alliance, but also what are the challenges and what is the good and the bad and the challenges that women are facing in terms of getting more women into leadership position?
Yeah. So Women's Earth Alliance, we work with grassroots women leaders to accelerate their environmental and climate justice initiatives in their communities. These are established leaders who have been working nonstop in their communities and have already started implementing their solutions, because I think we all know that women, as often those who are caretakers of communities, and like Elena was saying, they often are closest to the rainforest, in your case, to the natural resources, whatever the case may be. They know what the solutions are that their communities need, that are when climate change impacts are hitting them, when environmental devastation, environmental violence is being experienced. And so we see our role as coming in alongside those women leaders to offer them any kind of wraparound support. And ours mainly is around training and capacity building, whether or not they want that in entrepreneurship to create eco-enterprises, to be able to create alternative livelihoods to things like logging or animal trapping, things like that, or campaign communication support, resource mobilization. So that's really what Women's Earth Alliance does. But I loved your question about leadership and women's views of ourselves, because that question, to me, there's kind of a two-pronged answer. It's both, and Nina and I were talking about this earlier, it's both personal view of ourselves, but also systemic. So we work with a lot of women in various countries, and kind of in every place, including the United States, when we start working with them, the leaders will tell us, well, I didn't know you were talking about me when you were saying, you leaders are doing this, you're amazing leaders. We don't think of ourselves as leaders. And yes, we may not, as women, think of ourselves as leaders, but it's also, we weren't taught to think of ourselves as leaders. We were conditioned to think of ourselves just as everyday people doing kind of the work that we're supposed to be doing, even though that work is leadership. It's caring for our natural resources, it's caring for our communities, it's being that kind of frontline shock absorbers, really, of climate change. And so I think, I think there's just a two-prong approach or a two-prong perspective that needs to happen when we look at that question of why women aren't considering themselves to be leaders. It's a lot of times it's because of what is being communicated to them by our systems, our unjust systems in the world. And so our job is to really continue to break down those systems and to reinforce women's leadership by putting them in a community, by gathering community around them that recognizes their leadership and lifts them up.
So my second question is beautiful. Thank you. It's really a two-pronged approach, so I'm going to divide between Nina and Justin, because Nina, you have written a book, a couple of books on women leadership, basically, and what Kahia just said is so true. I mean, that includes me. It's like, no, I'm not a leader. Or honestly, if I'm to speak about myself, I was afraid of leadership. I thought leadership was like wearing the suit, sitting on the top of the table. I didn't even know what is like. How do I own my own self in the leadership rather than emulate someone else's leadership, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk more about, how do women find these, their own style of leadership? How does one, create the transformation, or how, in your experiences, have you seen the women who have created the transformation of saying, no, I don't want to be a leader, or okay, I'm going to wear a suit to be a leader, to say, no, this is my leadership, it's my voice, it's my tone, it's my truth, Can you talk more about that?
Well, sure. I mean, in my experience, part of what prompted me to start to look at leadership was when I was named a leader and I hated it. And I was also scared. I also felt that I hadn't earned it. And it wasn't, I found this dichotomy between knowing from Bioneers that we need all of us to be leaders, and myself wanting to say, no, don't put that label on me. And so I went into this inquiry and I actually read hundreds of transcripts of people who had spoken at Bioneers to understand who were the ones that I most admired and respected, and then question why and how were they defining leadership differently than the model that I had inherited unconsciously through our culture. And so I think that we all have been affected by models of leadership that are based on patriarchal, hierarchical, winner-take-all competitive paradigms. And we've all seen lots of women lead like men, right? So we have to, what I realized was we have to transform our understanding of what leadership is and looks like. And for me, it's both an inside and an outside job. This is sort of what I heard Kahea referring to, too, is that I have found for myself that I really had to go through a process of kind of, I call it decolonizing, and I know some people get offended by that, but for me, it felt like I was decolonizing myself from a bunch of beliefs and biases that I never consciously took on, but they were there. And they said, they caused me to judge myself. They caused me to apologize when I was emotional. They caused me to feel bad about, having a whole spectrum of experiences that didn't fit into the box of what I imagined leadership was supposed to be. And at the same time, so I think that we all, regardless of what gendered body we're in, we all have inherited these twisted models of what's feminine and what's masculine. And for me, whole system leadership, I call it full spectrum leadership, means drawing from any aspect of our humanity, based on, from the feminine to the masculine, from the lunar to the solar. Again, no matter what body you're in, we all need all of our human capacities to meet this time. And for me, that's wholeness. And I think that part of what I've experienced is one of the fastest ways for women to heal from that self-limiting, self-deprecating kind of model is in community, is that when we heal together, we can reflect our strengths to each other, because it's often much harder for me to see myself than for us to see what's strong and valuable in others, and to reflect that to each other so that we're lifting each other up. And to me, that's leadership.
That's beautiful. I mean, recently I was asked, what advice you would give to your younger self, right, at the beginning of your career. And I was like, honestly, the advice I have for my younger self is not in the beginning of my career, it's in the middle of my career when I rose to leadership.
Right.
Because at the beginning, you don't think of yourself as leader, you're charging, you're free-spirited, and then you get suddenly in the position of being a leader, and you don't know, you don't have the tools, you have the doubts, and that's when I made all the mistakes.
Yeah.
because I didn't own it was at the peak of my career, not at the beginning, because it was like not owning my leadership and not, frankly, having the tools or even the community, as you said. It's like everyone expected you to deliver, but you don't have like, you don't know, how to. So it's interesting that you're saying that put yourself in a community.
Yeah.
And I would say, hearing from both of you, use your other tools, connections to nature, connections to other women and their support. Mine came from my own spiritual journey, and wanting to explore making leadership my own rather than replicating someone else's definition of it,
Yeah, and I really agree with that. If the leadership model that we are seeing doesn't work for you, don't be afraid to, one, reinvent leadership, like invent it for yourself. But two, recognize that this form of leadership was not the only form of leadership that ever was. Yeah. Like, the patriarchy is not the only thing that ever was. For our indigenous communities, we had matrilineal communities, we had matrilineal societies that organized around councils of grandmothers or women leaders. And at the start of all of our trainings with women leaders, we do an exercise where we're like, whose shoulders are you standing on? Yeah. Like, call them in to be with you. Call your ancestors in to be with you here and support your leadership. So, yeah, I don't think we have to accept the things that we don't like about what we're being given.
Maybe one thing to add to that is, and it's building on what you were just saying, is for me, I had to find what I was here to be in service to. And because it never matched up to be a leader for myself. That doesn't speak to me, and that's an old model, it's a patriarchal model. And so I was lucky to have women in my life who kind of guided me and said, well, who are you here for? And what are you in service to? And it was very clear, nature. I'm here to be in service to nature. And as soon as I did that, it was amazing how much more conviction and power kind of grew in me. And I felt the confidence to speak up. Yeah. So if I could be speaking and leading in service to something that I love and value and want to protect, then I can lead.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Justin, I want to follow up on that, because not only in your leadership yourself, but you also have been really leading grant giving for decades to people's-led efforts, and now women-led efforts, right? And we talked, earlier in my presentation this morning that women get 2 cents out of every dollar in the environmental justice movement, which is what ultimately we're talking about, is how do we, create more solidarity and more support for women-led efforts. What, in your observation as being a funder in a way, right?
Yeah.
The challenges that, what do women that you're funding don't know about what are the challenges they're facing to get more money, to get more grants, to get more all of that?
So many. Where do I start? I mean, and so many in this crowd and here know about the issues with philanthropy. The whole system is rigged and has been rigged and has to be completely overhauled and redesigned. I mean, I had no idea when I started, because I was just kind of in a lucky path and an experience. I didn't come from a foundation experience. I didn't come from an NGO experience. I majored in fine arts and art history. I did film production. I did design work and had been an activist in high school, and then had this very fortunate kind of opportunity to start working with Leonardo DiCaprio and build his foundation from the ground up. But building it from the ground up, and actually building it from the ground up with the base of Bioneers, really shaped my thinking, really shaped the idea of doing grant making in community, in conversation, in relationship with the many amazing leaders that I felt deeply privileged to be in conversation with. And I just felt like I was there to listen, to learn, and to facilitate. And that was the honor of a lifetime. I mean, I still, looking back, can't believe that I had the honor and the privilege of participating and distributing $100 million to projects all over the world. And every single one of those projects taught me so much. And every single one of those projects gave me a very deep belief that something different is possible. And that resource flow is a deep, important part of that. It's part of addressing injustice and inequality and getting resources flowing to those on the front lines. And the possibility of changing that paradigm of less than 2% of all philanthropic capital going to climate and environment, which is my favorite stat of all time, and just fractions of it actually reaching frontline groups and organizations leading the way is the paradigm I want to shift. Because I know that if we switch that paradigm and we build power from the ground up, a different future is certainly possible, and it's one I want to be around for.
Yeah. I wanted to add a couple of things, if I may. One to the earlier question, which was one of the things that really helped me was identifying women who I found as mentors. And they weren't necessarily women who I knew personally. Some of them were women whose books I read, and I studied them, and I felt like, oh, when I read Terry Tempest Williams' books, I understood that I didn't have to confine myself to one field of inquiry, and that I could actually be free to roam between spirit and nature and culture, just like she did, but in my way. And so I felt like I found mentors who were writers, who I barely knew, but their books mentored me. And the other thing in relation to philanthropy, because I've been actually also privileged to be gifted money to give away. And so as a result of that, I've been a part of several philanthropic networks of some very progressive, mostly women funders. And what's been incredibly frustrating to me has been seeing the bias towards electoral change, for instance, as one of the main places that they're funding right now. Now, I understand that. We're in a political crisis in this country, so I don't resent it nearly as much as I used to. But I have to say, the political situation shrinks in comparison to having a livable home on Earth. And the lack of understanding of the power of grassroots frontline women, and the dedication and the determination. We were talking sometime earlier about what gives you hope, because it's a time to be asking what gives us hope, right? And for me, it's the absolute devotion that women have to the natural world and to caring for the good of the whole that gives me the most hope. Yeah. Which is why I love what Daughters for Earth is doing. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Well, you're all making me think about the story that I had when I was working way in the days in war zones. And, there's an arrogance, I have to say, that comes with the fact that we have college degrees and, we live perhaps in this society. And and even though I did not grow up in here, you come to America and sort of adopt American arrogance in a way, right? And you see, because that's the education system. And I remember going to the different conflict areas and working with women. I was like, okay, I got it. We're solving all your problems. And I remember the first time, every time I go, I would say I got slapped in the hands. And the biggest one, the first one that stayed with me was I'm helping a woman in Bosnia and Herzegovina to create a business, a small business, and it was a chicken business. And I was like helping her do her business plan. How many chicken you need? What's the inoculation they need? Food, whatever, housing for the chicken. I don't know. I've never seen. I've seen chicken, but I don't know the chicken business, And then I was like, one time I asked, I was like, okay, so how much how much you sell an egg? And then finally I said, well, how many eggs a chicken give a day? And that's when she lost all respect to me. Completely, because she looked at me and she's like, and you're gonna help me in here? A chicken give 1 egg a day. And I repeat that story over and over, and most people don't know how many eggs a chicken give a day. And it takes me back to your point, Justin. Yeah. This inherent arrogance in how we even go about the giving and the engaging, and not respecting knowledge that is not valued by college degree. That women had, I don't want to say more or better, but equal knowledge as my college degrees, right? It's like it's an equally important knowledge because these books did not teach me about the eggs and the chicken, right? So we have to, there's an inherent respect that we need to develop, humility and inherent respect that we do need to develop in how we engage and listen and learn from each other rather than coming, I am solving your problem in here, right? Now, I want to take us now to another layer of conversation, which is all the presentations in the last 2 days, it's clear there is a crisis. It's clear, in my opinion, I think in everyone's opinion here, that women are essential in solving this crisis. There's some challenge we're talking about in women claiming their leadership and holding their leadership, although they're doing the work anyway. So that's it. And getting and getting them, we need to get them more resources, which Justin and Nina, thanks to you to getting more of that. Question is, how do we bring about change? How can we be heard and bring, for lack of a better word, the other side, whatever we're talking with, whether it's governments or corporations, whether it's other companies or whatever, to on the board, in the discussion, as part of the discussion, to create change. Now, I know this is a big question. I also know we haven't figured it out. I don't think we have. And if we have, it would be good to share our experiences of what are some of the tactics, because we need to move from speaking to each other about this is a crisis to speaking with the other who don't agree with us, basically, and bringing them along. So, Helena, forgive me for loading this heavy question on you, but do you have good examples about how do we get good examples that may have worked or did not work, about how do we engage in dialogue to bring about change?
Yeah, good question and really hard question to answer as well. I don't think we can ever find just one answer for that, how to create change. I think there are many ways of doing it, and there are many ways of how you're not supposed to do it as well. But I think one story that I remember is when I think I was 18 or 17, this is a couple of years back, right after COP25, I was there with a lot of young people went to COP25 because that's the space where we're gonna stop climate change, and COP25 was gonna be this big space where change was gonna be created, and we left the conference being extremely disappointed. Not just that there wasn't, we didn't see the measures that we were expecting or that we wished for, the actions that we wanted to see. But one of the things that also really, really bothered myself and a lot of my friends that were there was that the fossil fuel industry that's causing climate change was there and was, just last COP, there were so many people representing the fossil fuel industry at COP that in a way, there is no way of advancing the climate negotiations because they have a say. And I used to be one of those people that was like, okay, if we're gonna discuss these things, we have to sit down and talk about it. And in a way, I still am, but sometimes people close themselves to dialogue. I think that happens a lot with the fossil fuel industry. Some of them are just not interested. They're just not interested in saving the planet, basically, which is, sad. But so my friends and I started this movement, which is Polluters Out, and it was 3 of us. It was me, my friend Isabella, and Aisha. Isabella was 17, I was 18, and Aisha was 20. And we started thinking, okay, so we have all these fossil fuel companies at COP25, and at COP26, we're going to make sure that they're not there. That's what our campaign was about. That's what we wanted to see. Unfortunately, at COP26, there was even more people from the fossil fuel industry. But people actually were talking about it that time because for an entire year we had been campaigning in universities, we had been campaigning online. We even had at COP26 last year in Glasgow, throughout all the metros in Glasgow, saying polluters out, we don't want you here, we don't want the fossil fuel industry at COP, which was all over the city basically. And so when we were in this process of campaigning, we were able to sit down the CEO of BP, of British Petrol, and we found ourselves in a situation where 3 young girls and a couple of other people from our movement were gonna sit down with the CEO of one of the biggest fossil fuel companies. And so how are we gonna do this, Like how are we gonna tell him that, you have the chance to change so much. You have the change to reverse, to stop, in a way, climate change. You're one of those people, and like at that age, okay, it's just a crazy thing to imagine. And we all had different opinions. I said, okay, but we need to like have a dialogue. We need to try to maintain this dialogue. Like, of course, we're not going to convince them at the first time we're sitting down with them. And someone else was, no, but we got to tell them, like, they're murderers, they're doing this, and they're killing the planet. And then there was, the third one was like, let's, kind of in the middle, let's go easy about this. And that was, like, 3 young girls having to decide that, like, how are we going to do this? And we tried all 3 of them. We tried dialoguing, we tried, and in the end, we kind of just like gave up and was like, okay, they're not going to listen anyways. And I think, that didn't lead to BP stopping their oil extraction. It didn't lead BP to do better environmentally. But we left learning from that experience, not learning, okay, this is how you should talk to an oil company, but just understanding that there are those situations where you can't go there, and they are not willing to listen, even if you do it in the right way or wrong way, if you're aggressive, if you're passive. And that kind of reflects on, what I'm trying to say with this is, if you go to, for example, my indigenous communities, and we have women that are doing a lot of work and that are taking leadership and are creating change in so many ways, it is because we as women can take it upon ourselves to create that change ourselves. We can take that step. But in that situation, I couldn't become the CEO of BP. I couldn't become that person. But we can take the step and choose to be leaders or choose to create change in those spaces, as in our communities, in our schools, in other places. So yeah, I just wish I could have been like, oh, now I'm the CEO of BP and I'm gonna stop exploiting oil everywhere. I couldn't. But then I can go back to other places and I can take up spaces where I can create change. So I think that was a really important lesson.
Very good. Very, very good. Would you ever meet with him again?
I don't think there's a point of meeting him, I don't think there is a point of... I remember, I think it might have been Greta that was asked what she would say to Donald Trump or something like that, and she was like, there is no point in meeting him, And it's true, there is no point of meeting them. But there is a point in making sure that we put people that we can talk to in those places. Yeah.
Beautiful. Excellent. You remind me of a young Afghan woman that was recently evacuated from Afghanistan just on the eve of the Taliban takeover over there. And she said, my mere existence, like I'm going to fight back by my mere existence and my voice, and I will make it uncomfortable and inconvenient for them because I will not stop talking and sharing and speaking, and she's like, so she can't speak, she won't speak with the Taliban, but she will make it hard for them until they acknowledge the role of women. So it's sort of the same thing, that the mere existence of keeping going makes it uncomfortable with them. How about you, Kaya? What are your thoughts on the same question? Because we do have to talk about it, right? I mean, we can't just talk with each other. We've got to have tactics and strategies, and sometimes all of them work.
Yeah.
Trying all of them can help.
And I think that's the main point, and it's something Helena touched on. And actually, I was just in the Indigenous Forum and listening to a panel right before this, and Candy White talked about this, about how grassroots solutions are the solutions, but there's not a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be different in each situation. And so I agree with knowing, where energy is, where our personal resources are best spent to create change, and where we might have a little more to give. For example, I'm going to be going to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting next week. Not necessarily to speak to the BPs and extractive industry that's there, but to speak to those who actually are willing to create change, because it's going to take all of us. It's grassroots solutions that are going to really move the needle, and we need support from everybody. And I think, like in any social justice movement, there are folks who have been on the front line for so long that it's exhausting, and more should not be constantly asked of them. And then there's others who can kind of slide in there and be like, I have a little more personal resources left. Let me go and do that. Let me sit in that spot and talk to this corporation or something. You can do what you need to do to rejuvenate, because we all need to be energized for our movements to succeed. So I think it's knowing our personal resources, being willing to work together to collaborate, to in the end really support and uplift and get behind grassroots solutions and bring those solutions to all levels, local, national, international levels, where we can implement them on whatever scale they need to be implemented on, so that they are specific to the communities that are being affected.
I think what you're saying is so important. I mean, within the women's movement, often, we are in solidarity and sisterhood when we are united, and it's amazing. But there's, of course, we're fighting for the same resources. We're always operating out of scarce resources. And there's also this level undertone of competition, right? Because we're like trying to get these little resources. And I came to learn that each one of us have roles. There is the demonstrator, there is the one who sits in the table and negotiate, there is the one who is advocating for and that if we see these roles are all contributing to the movement rather than competing with each other about who's getting that. But we're seeing she's the demonstrator, she's the negotiator, she's the advocate, then it becomes an alliance that we're seeing how we're each playing our roles, basically based on our passion or our superpower, whatever it is, right?
Our movement is an ecosystem, and we each bring different things, and we should start thinking of our movement like a mycelium network, that we shift resources here when that area needs more, and we shift them back here when and stop being in competition, like you said. It's going to take all of us working together.
Brilliant. Justin, a lot of your work, whether it is in One Earth or Daughters for Earth, is really about creating, the gist of it is increasing philanthropic dollars to a lot of these initiatives. And you're saying, I'm not going to be apologetic about philanthropic dollars. We need more, money, and philanthropic money in particular about that. What have been, I'm curious about, your own experiences in bringing, or challenges or successes, and bringing more people into that understanding that we simply need more philanthropic dollar, right?
Yeah.
It's not only about investment. It's not always about financial returns, but that is okay to have more philanthropy, and then we need it more. So what are some of the successes and what are some of the challenges that you have faced in that journey and bringing more people along the journey?
Great question. I was gearing up to answer the prior question, so I. But I can move right along to that one.
And you can still address the prior one. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just building on what you all were sharing about that, something comes to mind. I feel like it's been like a theme throughout the day, both with what Clayton shared about his experience, what you shared about your experience. There's something like very powerful about taking care of both the inner world and the exterior world, and which has been a journey for myself, for sure, of course, and I'm still very much learning it. But I think that we can act as activists in a myriad of ways. And by that, I mean, in the same way that if you're trying to learn how to be kind of healthy and take care of yourself, you learn about making healthy boundaries, making hard lines in the sand about things that absolutely are your boundary that you're not willing to cross. It's the same thing for the movement and for certain things that are just not okay, right? So you have a clear boundary about that. And then, so when there's a BP, executive who is clearly on their own journey and they're not willing to waver, then we don't necessarily give our energy to that, because it's clear that they're not showing up from a place of respect. They're not showing up from a place of reciprocity. They're not showing up from a place of wanting to listen and learn. And so we protect our energy and we move on. And where you do invest your time is when you see that somebody else is coming to the table with respect right away, and they're interested and they have a sense of intrigue and curiosity and wanting to learn about you and learn about your experience. Those are the people to invest personal time in. And so it was just interesting to hear you all say that, so I wanted to share that. And then your question around philanthropic resources, Mike.
Well, it's because it's the same actually question. How do
Yeah.
you bring people along the journey with us, rather?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was more about, one could be tactical and policy, but the other one is also about money.
Yeah. Yep. Right now, I mean, first of all, it's always been an issue of not enough philanthropic capital flowing into the space and in the right ways. But right now, the current thing that drives me absolutely crazy is that people that already have resources and should be stepping up to the table with philanthropy, a lot of them are obsessed with impact investing and making money in this moment of crisis. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role for that. Some of it is good. But for example, and you spoke to this this morning in your keynote, a lot of that investment is going into climate tech solutions that are wasteful, are not the solution, and they undermine the ability for the solutions that we have right now to be resourced. And so that paradigm right now, and I'm finding in a lot of the spaces and conversations that I get drawn into, an opportunity to kind of take a stand for philanthropy, for generosity, for the kind of resource flow that need to go to the frontline solutions that exist right now. And so, and that act and being in partnership with communities that are leading the way forward is such a reciprocal relationship, and such a moment of opportunity and beauty. And so I try to, when in conversation around it, we use our scientific framework to kind of bolster the role that these solutions play and this tight time frame that we are in for scaling it. But then I also try to paint a picture of what's possible. Trust begets trust. So much can happen when you show up to a conversation and you trust that the person who is leading a project on the ground in their community knows what's right and knows what their community needs. And you just give them the space to express it. And that experience, that journey, is something that philanthropy needs to step into. It's trust-based philanthropy. It's believing in people. And that's a beautiful invitation. So I try to do both like, this is validated and this is what we need for the folks that are operating from one side of their head, and then inviting them into the space of imagining what's possible and how much it's going to bring back to them as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Sorry.
Go ahead,
No,
please.
but I think it's really interesting what you're saying. Sometimes I think what's, really, what philanthropy is really lacking is, or I guess it's the idea of how do we measure the success of philanthropy.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the Amazon, if I would be to write a grant, to be applying for a grant, it would be, and I'm saying I'm living in the rainforest, it would be much easier for me to get funding to plant trees than to, for example, heal people or work in community.
Yeah.
And it's it's this Western idea of what philanthropy and funding should look like.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have planted 10,000 trees and we can see this, and we're bringing back nature. But the most important thing, for example, in the rainforest is preserving the nature that we already have. And that you do by preserving and protecting the people that are working on preserving land.
Yeah.
And as we were and as we were saying before, indigenous women are essential to that. But that is not how, I guess, the picture is painted outside of our own territories. People may not know that even. And I think start focusing on different kinds of things, different, healing is really important. Community is really important. Education is really important. But as you say, we're not going to see money coming out of that. You're not gonna invest money and get millions of dollars back on it. But
we are going to create a healthy, vibrant future. And
there is going to be a change, a fundamental change.
Yeah.
And though that type of success you cannot measure in dollars, and you cannot measure it in, whatever idea of success that there is around philanthropy.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. I wanted to add a couple of things. One is that kind of relates back to our conversation about leadership at the beginning, which is that I've found, in my life, I'm both a fundraiser and a grant giver. And so I wear all these different hats in relation to resource flows. And part of what I feel like I've learned is that when I own my own authority, other people respect and treat me differently, right? I mean, that's been true throughout my life, that as I change my attitude towards myself, I show up differently in the world, and other people treat me differently as a result. Similarly, as a fundraiser, it was tremendously important to me to realize that I had to carry the power and the dignity of what I was asking and inviting support for, so that instead of being like, going with your begging bowl to somebody who has a lot and asking them for a little, I could carry it differently and say, I want to invite your partnership because of what we both care about this much. And have the dignity to say, what we really need is this much, not this much. And it's something I've learned partly from partnership with Kenny. But, the dignity to actually ask for what you really need is not something that I've found comes easily to me or to most women. And being able to hold, it also relates to what you were saying, Justin, about, being connected to what we serve and love, because the cause is so much bigger than any of us, and we're not asking for ourselves, And the last thing I wanted to say was, and this sort of relates to your BP guy, is, one of my favorite stories, I think, comes from Osprey Oriole Lake of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, where she described going to meet with a CEO of a multinational bank, I think with Casey Camp Horinek, and she described how this amazing matriarch spoke to him about the personal impacts to her people of what his bank was doing and funding. And I remember hearing that by the end of Casey talking, the bank president had tears in his eyes, And I think part of how we have to affect change is by reaching people in their hearts and by putting relationship before task and relating as fellow human beings who are in a really dire situation.
I mean, it's so funny because as you're speaking, one of my questions in here for you, as a matter of fact, was in the context of two things. Because on the one hand, as a woman of color, there is such a thing as prejudice, that even when I come with my dignity and my integrity, and this is my, no, I'm not this, I am this, I still don't think we're seen, right? Like, we're still like patronized. I mean, so there is, sometimes it's that the prejudice is so much. I mean, and sometimes, frankly speaking, it came from people I love and friends, and they knew me, and they still ask me some horrible question that just like a punch to the guts, It's like, oh, you still don't see me.
Yeah.
So it's like, so it's true that this is, if we go into our integrity and our embody our values, we are heard more. And it's also equally true that this prejudice is so deep that, like, no matter what, sometimes, not all the time, so no matter what, we're still not seen. So how does one go about going into the heart space in order to create change? And it always reminds me of the movie Arrival. I don't know if you remember Arrival, but it's a world crisis happening. And anyway, I don't want to go into the movie, but the change that the main character, which is a female character, creates in the major general leader of, army leader, is going through his heart, right? Like talking about an intimate story that teared him up. Boom, the question, the thing changed. So it's a struggle, and I actually would love to hear your commentary about it, because it's not an easy journey of facing that prejudice. And sometimes that prejudice is not because I'm a woman of color. Sometimes it's just because I'm a woman. Right? It's just like, we're still not seen ultimately, And so how do you face that prejudice, go to a space in your heart, and still come out of it to create another language so you can be heard while staying in integrity and in love? Any tips? From anybody here, because we all have to learn, right?
I wish I knew. I mean, it's such a deep question. And, we are dealing with a paradigm shift and a system shift. And I think Valerie Hudson, is a feminist scholar, and she says gender is the deepest bias in the human psyche, deeper than color or faith or anything else. And I have come to believe that she's right. I sometimes wonder whether drawing parallel experiences, like for me, as I began really awakening to racial justice issues, I realized that growing up with white skin in this country and white supremacy, and the privileges that attended that, gave me blinders. And that I had to actually consciously do the work of removing my blinders so that my heart could be pierced by other women's experiences. And so I'm wondering about how can we talk about that in a society that is so heavily masculinized, with such a toxic imagining of what masculinity even is, so that, to be able to reach people's hearts. It's like, do you make the equal first and say, like you, I realize I had privileges, and because of them, my heart wasn't available to really feeling the truth of what was happening. And there is value, this sort of draws me into a rabbit hole, but it's worth saying there are a lot of our human abilities that have been categorized as feminine and therefore devalued, right? So men in positions of power don't think they're allowed to feel, right? And how do we revalidate all of our human capacities and say, actually leadership needs to come from the heart, and how do we value having emotions as being really important significators of where we need to go and what we need to listen for. And how do we validate that among ourselves and then within the larger community and invite men into that? Because, life is so shaky right now that it should be a time for meaningful conversations to be more accessible.
It's the only way we can do. I mean, it's the only way to move forward is to have meaningful conversations and dialogue with each other. I want to give you a heads up if anybody has questions or want to contribute to the discussion, there are going to be 2 mics, one on each side, and maybe if you're ready, go there, and we'll go another round in here, and we'll look for your questions in the meantime. So. I have to say, Helena, I did meet not with the BP CEO, but many years ago with ExxonMobil CEO. I was in a panel with him, and he made a comment that, it's not about the money. We have money enough for women. And I was like, it is about the money. We don't have money, and it's so interesting. He was upset not at me, he was like, I caught him in his ignorance, basically. And what was interesting in the backstage, what happened, and I saw him, and everyone saw him, upset at his staff, saying, "Why didn't you tell me that there is no money going to women?" It's interesting. So whether it's created a change or not, I don't think it created a change personally, because I don't want to say anyway, it didn't create any change, but that. I think there are times in which we can call people on their, do our research. What I'm hearing from us, do our research, call the lie, stay true to ourselves, be in alliance, in community and in alliance. I mean, we need the men, we need the other women, we need the alliances of people who can communicate in ways that others cannot communicate. Sometimes we're not heard, but you may be heard, right? So, bring more money and create that dialogue and create a trust relationship with people. And I'm going to watch out for questions. And we have a question here, and then we'll keep on going. So,
hi, is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Sweta, and I'm so honored to be here. 12 years ago in my apartment, I had a fundraiser for women empowering women. So it feels like a real full circle moment here. I love that you started off with the conversation about leadership because I'm actually a leadership coach. And I remember when I first received the download that I'm supposed to be a leadership coach, my first thought was, how can I be a leader? I left my profession. I used to be a professor. I said, I don't have the title doctor in front of my name anymore. I'm not making money. I don't have any of this. And what I've learned about women leadership is so much about what you've shared. And when I think about that conversation about philanthropy and performance philanthropy and the speaking to the heart, the one thing that comes to me, this is more of a comment than a question, but growing up in a very patriarchal home, being a woman of color as well, being in a part of a culture that's both oppressed and privileged, I think these conversations are so rich. One thing that's been helpful for me, at least, in a micro level, in interacting with this, again, lots of patriarchy, is speaking to both the head and the heart. I've had to learn to not judge someone because their values are not the same as mine. And what's been so helpful for me that I've learned from my own mentors is that sometimes helping them connect the dots for how the things we value, like healing the people, are just as connected to the money or the impact. It's not either or, and coming from my old world of, academia is that's what qualitative studies are all about. It's about connecting those dots to how it's how the impact that they're looking for is connected to the impact that we're looking for. And so it's just something I felt called to share, and I'm wondering if anybody else wants to share anything about that or what they think about that.
Thank you. Anybody have any comment on that?
You know, the one thing that I would offer is, I mean, I agree with you, and I tend to refer to what I think I hear you pointing towards as relational intelligence, right? And it's been an interesting theme I've been hearing as I walk into different sessions around the conference is about how if we put relationship ahead of task, we can get more done. And also about how it's a really important leadership skill that we need to be cultivating in ourselves and each other to not avoid conflict. I heard Shilpa Jain is a wonderful leader, and we had a little panel yesterday, and she said that Malidoma Somé says that conflict is a relationship's way of asking you to go deeper.
Beautiful.
And I was like, oh, that's so good. How useful. And what if we could practice turning towards the conflict as a way to, to see whether we can deepen the relationship.
Beautiful. And important for many of us to go into the conflict rather than avoid it. Yeah. We have another question here.
Thank you so much. I see matrilineal succession of title as probably like one of the easiest paths to world peace. And I wonder how we can imagine that towards even corporate and organizational landscapes in regards to, we have this idea of equality and justice is going so much further and sending the pendulum further the other way. How can I sit in a room and what is a quicker path to not be in a room full of white men that are making these decisions and empowering the voices? What are some keys that you could see it actually more than just an invitation in a chair? How is it that we could see it go beyond that in corporate and organizational landscapes?
Anybody? Thank you. Anybody wants to take a crack at that?
Well, I know that there are a lot of issues with Justin Trudeau as a leader, but when he said, I'm making half my cabinet women because it's whatever it was, 2020, I was just thrilled. And the truth is, we could have quotas. I really appreciated hearing Franz de Waal this morning saying, the issue is not so much about gender, it's about equality. And there is data that says that once you have 30% of a minority in a field, until you have 30%, no one feels flanked enough to really speak out and really, stand on behalf of their own perspective. So what if, there were both in corporations and in governance, immediate quotas that said, no, we're going to have at least 30%. That would be different. It would be a start. And I think there's something underlying that, which is that at the moment, there are a lot of people in this country who perceive that women's empowerment is a zero-sum game and threatens them. And that's, again, part of the paradigm, part of the patriarchal, colonial, capitalist paradigm that we're all looking to leave behind, but it's deep. And so, I'd be curious to hear if you have ideas about how to do that. I don't know. It's really interesting.
We like to say it's like the first time in like a lot of history that women could own land and like become CEOs of companies. And I'd like more examples of being able to see that leadership, even if perhaps they don't have the experience or the qualifications, just to be able to see that and see more men take a back seat to the experience and allow women to be the CEOs and the COOs and the C-suites of these organizations, because just seeing it allows my daughter to grow up believing it. She's not on the planet yet, but But the future daughter can actually grow up and believe it. 'Cause that's why this privilege works for like a white man, is because you don't have any limitations in your brain to believe that anything could hold you back when everything else tells you the alternative perspective. So just like seeing it to believe it, like it would be just like amazing round.
It's true. I mean, I have to say, we have less actually women CEOs now than in the last 2 years since the Me Too movement. And there was the backlash of that is, a lot of people in leadership positions, in Wall Street and all, it's like there's a motto going on, avoid women at all costs.
Yeah.
Right? Like among them, and this is not me saying it. This is the line that goes on. And so, I have come to learn that change is not a linear process. It's a zigzagging process. But what creates change is a clarity and perseverance. And for us to be able to be in perseverance, we've got to hold each other and have the healing, the love, the truth of our own values, and so on, in order to keep climbing that mountain. We have a question on this side.
Can I just answer?
Oh, please do answer. Yes.
Sorry. I think that, we talk a lot about, like making sure that 30%, 50% of the cabinets or the workspaces, that women take them up. And then once they are there, even amongst women ourselves or from the men, our coworkers, people that we study with, in a way will always make women feel less. And I think when it comes to corporations or organizations, it's really important as well to implement strategies, spaces to combat the political violence that exists in these spaces. It's not, it's not going to be that coworkers are hitting each other, but there is this silent type of discrimination that makes sure that young women, especially young women of color, and women in general feel less empowered, feel less entitled to make decisions, to step up and take up leadership. And that is a struggle that becomes a struggle within ourselves, not just with the people that we're working with, but okay, am I actually capable of doing this because everyone around me is telling me that I'm not? And that is what you were touching on, like how do we have people having prejudice about us, how do we continue from that? And of course, it's something that it's a lot of personal work, but if you are able to create change in a space, it is also making sure that women do not have those experiences in a workspace, in whatever spaces. And I guess, I haven't done college yet. I just finished high school last year, but
amazing. Seriously. I mean, you have the wisdom of all of us. Amazing. So inspiring.
But even in high school, that's a feeling that you get, okay, because you're a girl, or and that's something that and it's just a reflection of how our societies work. But what is actually being done to combat that? What spaces are being created, what rules, what policies, and not just silently watch while women are being violated, because sometimes it can be verbally, it's by pushing them aside, it's by making them feel less, or even you do this and we'll take care of the rest. So I think just mapping out what type of micro-violences is it that goes on in corporations, in organizations that keep women out of the spaces of leadership is extremely important.
I must say, it is women like Helena, that give me hope. And, it fuels my spirit to keep on going for all of us, right? Bravo, bravo. Thank you. I have a question here.
Yes, a comment and a question. I'm retired now, but I was the district director for the U.S. Department of Labor Wage Hour Division for Los Angeles for 350,000 companies. And I was the first woman district director. When I was first hired by my agency, they could choose not to hire someone because of a woman. And I just have to tell you, when you're talking to people like the CEO of BP, sometimes you just have to realize, and I'm sorry, this is a horrible generalization, there are 70-year-old men who don't even see their privilege when it comes to women. And it's not worth arguing with them about it. It's not worth losing sleep over. You can say, you may think that, but in fact, this is what we're talking about here, and this is what we're going to do. And we're not going to play your game anymore. And so I think the clarity and perseverance is extraordinarily important. And another thing, so this is my question to you. One of the things that I think women bring to leadership in particular is the collaborative nature of our relationships and getting work done. So if I'm in a group of women and there's someone who's really good at finances, then that's the person who should be the leader for that moment. If there's somebody else that's really good at marketing, then they should be the leader in terms of making those decisions. And so I'd like to hear more examples of when you've seen collaborative nature of leadership working. Thank you.
Justin, I'd love you to take that on, and of course anybody else who wants to jump in, but
Well, I guess all of the work that I've been privileged to help be a part of facilitating has all happened because of really deep collaborative approaches. And acknowledging how much more can get done together than if you try to singularly do it yourself. And actually how much joy is created in working in collaboration with others. There was a moment in my journey where I suddenly realized that I wasn't alone and that this wasn't on me, and that was such a huge relief and also a huge opportunity for furthering deep collaboration with women, with men, with many different people, and really thinking about the collective and how much more you can charge and get done if you really honor that this person has deep knowledge in this region, and therefore we can let them lead there. This person has incredible expertise at dealing with corporates, and we can really lean into the strategies that they've developed. As you pointed out, the movement is an ecosystem, and it's incredibly powerful together. And it's one of those pieces that I think is empowering to us as individuals if we tap into the collective and the power of kind of distributed, diverse skill sets and talents. It's really a profound experience. And then more specifically, the experience with Daughters for Earth has been such a great model of collaboration. It was an idea that was germinated with you and with Jody and with Rachel. And then on your journey of developing it, we met each other. And then we started working together, just really kind of ad hoc, just sharing knowledge and discussing a strategy for helping this to be a success. And then you said, hey, we want to do this with you. And I said, great, let's do it. And it has been, I've said this to Zainab and to Rachel a lot, but this has been really a powerful experience for me from the lens of working with women, because my past experience was really very dominated by men. And I did not realize how much that was affecting me. And so to have, over the past year and a half, worked with Zainab and with Rachel and with many women leaders across the space and figuring out the right strategy for this has really been a profound experience for me. I didn't realize how joyful it could be to really co-lead. I didn't realize how profound the solutions that you come up together with are when you operate in that space. And again, it's in relationship, it's in collaboration, and it's with trust and with respect. And you can get a lot done when you operate that way. So for me, it's just, there's so many examples of this across the field. And that is those models and replicating and sharing and learning and continuing to build models that are really about collaborative models of leadership is super exciting. It is a way to make our movement much more robust and strong and resilient. And in the end, really empowered to drive the change that we want.
Okay, yes.
I will say one more example is so Women's Earth Alliance, where I'm a co-director. I'm a co-director alongside two other co-directors. And we get feedback. We hear from some folks like, really? You guys need 3 co-directors for your organization? And for us, it's because we are moving towards a horizontal leadership structure. We don't want to have these hierarchies in place. And we were started as a circle of women, and we see a circle of women in leadership as the right path forward for us. But speaking to this question, we all also hold different aspects, and we underline different things within our organization, whether that's fundraising, communications and marketing, programs, and we all collaborate on everything, but there is one person who really holds that. And it's a really supportive way of working, like just internally, personal resources, supportive way of working, to know that you're doing things in partnership, you have thought partners on everything, but that you also can move things along because there is, like, you can make your case and make a decision. Yeah. So these collaborative leadership models, and I think further flattening our leadership models to create horizontal leadership structures are really important, and circles of leadership are really, really important models.
The other thing that I'm seeing across the nonprofit landscape is that, the old model of having one executive director that was responsible for everything is a total burnout. I mean, I think the stats are that EDs typically last like 2 years. And that's crazy. And how does that undermine our movement building? And so, I love this model that Kahea is doing, and many others are doing, and we're doing it in Bioneers in our own ways too. But it allows for leadership with self-care. Like, what a concept. And if we're going to be in this for the long haul, we better integrate that. And being able to spell each other and take turns and say, I need help here, Yeah.
Beautiful. We are getting towards the end of our time, so I want to take 2 questions at the same time. Just hear the questions before answering, and then we can go around and wrap it up with the answering the question and putting our own last touch on it. So maybe we just go straight to the question, if that's possible.
Hello. I just want to offer, in the discussion about speaking truth to power, I think I've struggled with this forever, whether it's personal or institutionally. And the only, this might be oversimplification, but one of the ways I think about it when I'm presented with that position is what is it, not only what we have in common, but that we are the commons. The collaborative leadership is the commons. We think of nature, air, water, the commons. Also art and dance, music, movement, the commons. So to try to change the conversation so that you're presenting it in that light. Okay, so maybe that's enough. But
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is it a question?
It's a short comment.
Great.
Some time ago, I realized what Shilpa Jane said, Nina, that you talked about, that where there's conflict, we need to go deeper. And I just want to say, with corporations, we have conflict, and I say we need to go deeper. My experience now is that since the pandemic has given us such pause, it's given people who run massive organizations a lot of pause too. And my experience now, and I have a commitment to defang corporations for the activist community and defang activists for the corporate community so we can work together. That's where the money is. And there's a lot of expertise and power there that we're angry with, but there's a lot of power there that we can use. And I'm finding heart, engagement, authenticity, eagerness to play inside of big companies now, and not not all of them, but I want to just say where there's conflict, we need to go deeper, and that's a place where I think collaboration is absolutely vital for us to turn around the situation we're in. So
That's an important comment.
you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So we have 5 minutes left. And honestly, the very practical part of me wants to go straight to the point of what do we all need? You know, like this is a moment we covered a lot of grounds. We know that women are impacted the most by climate. We do know that we need more resources. We actually need to talk. We talked about we need our own communities and our support, owning our voice, being authentic and collaborate or not. You know, but what like if we can go to the end us with the message that you want this community to know. And if each one of us can go through that, what are the message that you want to leave everyone here, whether it's asking for something or whether it's asking for reflections on something as it relates to women and Mother Earth? And we're starting with you, Helena.
I'm starting. Wow, there's so many reflections I'd like to leave, but yeah, I've my home territory since I can remember has always had threats, whether it is the fossil fuel industry, whether it is other type of extractivism. The threats that we face are so different. It can be extractivism, it can be another type of violence, but all the threats are violent. And the people on the ground have always been the ones that have been defending our rights, our territories, our futures, our children's futures. And something I also say, and I heard you say something very similar, was that, I see when the children in my community are running around, playing in the river, or climbing trees, all of those things. It's one of the most important things for our future, not because, obviously they're having fun and enjoying themselves, but just their existence there makes it possible to preserve all of that land. And all of that land makes sure that we that live there can live there, but is a huge contribution to the entire world. And we often do not think about these people's existence as something so valuable. Yesterday, my sister at our presentation was saying that my community was offered $10,000 for giving up 140,000 hectares of rainforest to an oil company, which is the same as $10 per person in my community. That is the value that was given to our children's lives. But it's not, the value of our lives, but just the value of the existence of those children and those people. But the people that are taking care of these children are also Indigenous women. And so we need to, Indigenous women, Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous culture is a huge part of the solution to so many things to so many of the issues that we're facing today. It is the answer to so many questions that we have today. But we need to just seek in the right places, speak to the right people, but also fund the right places and fund the right people. So I guess, I think I'll just leave it there.
Beautiful. Right on. Right on. Thank you. Kaya.
I think I'm gonna kind of continue on with what you said, because that's really it. I think grassroots solutions are the solutions we need. That's Indigenous solutions. That's oftentimes women-led solutions. These are the things that are going to move the needle on climate. These are the things that are going to preserve a livable earth for all of us for generations to come. And so I think this is a moment where everyone's allyship and action are necessary. So allyship, talk about this, tell people about community-based solutions, about indigenous rights, about land back, about women's equity, talk about it everywhere you go. Do, land recognition when you enter rooms, things like that. But also understand that those things must come with action. And sometimes, and they can be action no matter what kind of action you're taking. Where is your fire? Where is the fire inside of you that tells you that something can be different? And go towards that fire and create action around that. And or, preferably also look to the land rematriation work that's happening in your communities. Look to the women-led climate efforts that are happening in your communities, the indigenous climate efforts that are happening, and get behind those. We need to mobilize resources for grassroots work. That's just, it needs to happen. And so that is an action everyone who has that capacity can take, in addition to all the other actions that you're feeling called towards.
Thank you. Justin?
Definitely going to build on everything that you just offered up. Yeah. I guess I would say, maybe after you leave the space of Bioneers, which is such a deep community and you feel such a sense of connection, when you go about your day, imagine all the people that you met here, all the activists that you know, all the women, the incredible women leading amazing work that you've heard from. Keep them in your mind's eye. Imagine that network, that incredibly profound web of amazing people around the world. You are not alone. It is a vast array of people, and in particular women, that are leading amazing solutions. And when you tap into that and you consistently kind of honor that and show up for it, it builds power in the right way. It builds collective power. And the false narrative that you don't want to give into is that we don't have power and that we can't solve this. So I think imagining that collective, acknowledging it, remembering the stories, remembering the faces, is a way to walk in collective power. And I wouldn't be, I would be foolish not to say, come join us at Daughters for Earth. That collective community of women around the world, we are aiming to support those incredible women. We're aiming to help tell those stories. And so come to our website, hear those stories, join us. There are things that you can do in your everyday life, but there are also ways that you can show up for this collective. And the collective, giving to the collective will then be reciprocal in building your sense of hope and building your sense of power.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, for me too, I feel like I want to build on what you've all said, and pull on a thread that you mentioned early on in this conversation, Zainab, which is the arrogance of Americans. And just say, we all have these biases, and the biases run deep, and some of them are about top-down solutions rather than bottom-up. And I feel like part of what's happened for me in the last several years is that because I have had the opportunity to really get to know some amazing frontline women of color doing climate justice work and actually fall in love with them, it helped me peel away the blinders that said, I know about what's right and wrong. I know I'm sitting on the right side of this issue, right? It helped me to feel with my heart connected to what they're standing for and with every day. And so I think, my suggestion and request, just to build onto what all of our sisters here have said, is challenge yourself to get to know a frontline woman of color and become friends with her and be willing to show up on her behalf and to learn what her experience is and then act in support of what you care about most and really want to help bring yourself to, because the time for being on the right and wrong side is past. We need each other too desperately right now. And so act and watch your own biases so that you don't think that bigness is better, because it's not. Local is better, small is great, ground up is where the change needs to happen. And I think if we can all disabuse ourselves of those biases and keep showing up for and with each other in really meaningful, active, ongoing ways, it's going to help reknit the fabric of the world. And that's what I'm committed to with all of you and all of you. Thank you.
Well, and I will end by saying, first of all, thank you so much for everyone. We have 20 to 30 years. This is our lifetime. We can make the change in our lifetime, right? And I believe that this is the era of the people. This is the era of the people. And the people on the ground are led by women like Helena and Kahea and Justin and Nina and many, many, many others. And our job collectively is to put more support in the people. We can talk the reason I wanted to talk about the challenges of women leadership, because it's easier to talk about and to admire from afar and all of that. It's really hard from inside because we don't have resources. We're having all this, generations of trauma that we're dealing with, the baggage of insecurities that we have been told we are, and we have to fight it within ourselves, right? So we do need everything right now. This is the time to roll up our sleeves, and this was like daughters for Earth are rising, and all of us are these daughters, right? So roll up our sleeves, roll up your sleeves, and show up in whatever way you know how to show up. Because this is the time. There is no other time. And we needed to do it for ourselves and for 7 generations in the future. So join us in any way you can and you want, and do whatever you can. And thank you so much. Thank you for Bioneer. Thank you for your patience with us. Thank you for our panels for being absolutely inspiring. You filled my heart today, and I am grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you so, so much.